The work on the left was the image used to advertise our conversation, but you chose that, Christopher, and I was interested, you made the comment that you chose that because it was the work that made you most think of Turner when you saw that painting, and I'd like to know why you thought that.
So I won't say that thinking of Turner was a completely random thought. Although I'm happy to plug the Met, and it's Turner's too. And I have to be a huge Turner fan. But my father was a huge Turner fan, and when he ultimately gifts a group of his murals to the Tate Gallery in London, it is largely because they were going to hang just 2 galleries away from the Clore Gallery or the Clore Galleries at the Tate. Where they have just the most magnificent Turner collection in the world, next to the Met.
No, actually, better than the Met. No, I'm not. I'm definitely better than the Met.
There's more.
It's more, and it's better. Trust me.
But I'm not sure if it fully comes across in this reproduction. From my angle right here, maybe it's not. But there's a wispiness and a whiteness, that yellow, and the way the whiteness creeps out around that diffuse yellow rectangle that reminds me of late Turner and his skies, and you can never quite see where the sky and the land meet, where the sky and the sea meet, and what is sun and what is cloud, and that's the sort of the literal aspects of what's happening in Turner's composition. But of course, Turner is not really painting land and sky and sun and cloud anymore. He's creating a feeling state through colors and a suggestion of a landscape that evokes a great deal of emotion in us as we look at it. And I think my father is going for that same effect. And certainly in a painting like this, for me, he's evoking much of the same type of thing that Turner is after as well.
Before we do the work on the right, do you want to see the Turner that I chose in response to your comment about that Rothko?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right, we'll do that, and then we'll come back to this one. All right, this one. I chose not the Met, Turner from Tate. It's Regulus, and it's a painting that he did in 1828 and then reworked it in 1837. And by then, Turner was extremely established, extremely well known as an artist, and in fact was already coming under fire for his excessive use of yellow, sort of his dissolution of form in his work, which would increasingly happen in the next decade, in the 30s as well as the 1840s. But for this one, the light coming at the center, where he really, when he reworked it, he seems to have layered on even more chrome. He liked chrome yellow and more white paint to build up the intensity of that light. And of course, in so doing, Turner was looking back at Claude Lorraine, the great 17th century painter whose seaports Turner emulated and admired and wanted to be seen as Claude's equal in the 19th century. So for that aspect and the light, it made me think of Turner, but also Turner's, in turn, his emulation of another earlier artist and the influence that Claude had, and so much so that Turner, when he bequeathed his works to the National Gallery in London, he stipulated that his paintings hang next to Claude's seaport paintings. So that kind of art historical dialogue that Turner was engaged in the 19th century also made me think a little bit about this 20th century artistic dialogue. So that's why I chose this one.
You know, what I'm also struck by is this is not unlike some of my father's mythic paintings, where there's a myth title, and there may be some sort of mythic figure, but somehow the myth seems to get subsumed by a much larger emotional quality in the painting.
No, you're absolutely right. This one, the title Regulus, alludes to a Roman general and who got taken prisoner, I think, by the Carthaginians, and they did terrible things to him, including blinding him and then forcing him to stare at the sun. So that blinding light in the center of the composition is a metaphor for that. And art historians have debated which figure in that painting is in fact Regulus in the painting, or are we the viewers Regulus? And I prefer that less literal interpretation of Turner's painting, and I think comes closer to the effect of your father's works as well.
Absolutely, and it is blinding. It's just overwhelming, the light coming at you.
So should we go back to the other one, because I like the other one too?
Okay.
Okay, that.
So this is actually one of the largest paintings my father painted. Unlike most of my father's paintings, it actually has a title. It has the very evocative title of Number 15, 1957. So this is actually a moment in his career when his palette starts to darken, and we'll see just how much it darkens in a couple of minutes. But it's still a painting that is suffused with color. It is also, it's a painting that, one of the few paintings I think that actually really communicates its massiveness. I mean, these rectangles, really, you feel their weightiness, and yet because of the way he's able to use color and because of the way he's able to feather that bottom part, it doesn't feel like they are simply weighty. It feels like despite that, they somehow float free of the canvas. And this was something that my father's playing with all throughout his career, and particularly from this point on, where he is creating something that is very much an object, and he is always insistent that he is creating something that is a real thing. And yet they belie their massiveness, and they create something for our imagination, and that somehow he's able to make these apparently very massive things float free. And I think that's, again, sort of, I don't know if it's a metaphor for the soul, but it's something that he returns to over and over in his paintings. Something that, where if it's, we want to see it as a figure in front of the background, but it's something that belies the corporality, if you will, of the work.
Well, if you don't mind, hopefully, continuing a little more with Turner, because he plays a kind of key role in 1966. In 1966, MoMA had a Turner exhibition curated by Lawrence Gowing, and the exhibition had about 100 works by Turner, but it had its own bias, perhaps to reflect both Gowing's taste and also the fact that it was at MoMA and, say, not at the Met. And the work privileged Turner's later works from the 30s and 40s, and also more of his watercolors than his paintings. And Gowing makes a case for Turner as a precursor of 20th century abstraction, and writes an essay to go with the catalog. And it's a show that your father saw, and this is one of Turner's, this is by no means a finished painting like the work we just looked at, but rather this is one of what's called his color beginnings, where Turner would set up a composition just loosely brushing in color, and with the vaguest, if any, suggestion of form, but really using color to block things out. And this is one of so-called Turner's color beginnings that your father saw and had was prompted to make a famous remark.
Oh, so when my father was in discussions with the Tate about the gift of his murals, and he mentioned that he wanted to have the paintings hang near Turner, he remarked, "Oh, that chap Turner learned a lot from me."
So, I'm sure that's exactly what, Lawrence Gowing, and I'm sure they wanted at MoMA. It's a fascinating dialogue set up at a moment and at a place where it's unexpected, but it was prescient in so many ways. Although I have to say it was, again, slightly biased, because Turner didn't always paint with such abstraction, but nonetheless, that's what everyone was gravitating toward in the 1960s, and the parallels are uncanny.
Yeah, it's very striking, and I guess what's for Turner a color beginning is for my father a color ending. But I was mentioning to you today, I was looking through. I have a lovely book of Turner they call them just skyscapes, right? So it's formatted like this, and it's just watercolor after watercolor of him painting the skies, and often just very, if you want to call it impressionistically, it's quite abstract. And although he's trying to, I think he's trying to capture elements of a sky, I think it's really much more of an exercise in not in painting a sky, but in painting a composition and evoking that feeling that the skies and the colors that he's bringing to it, and also all the action and turmoil of those skies really bring to the viewer, and that he tries to capture in so many of his paintings.
Well, speaking of turmoil, two more Turners, and these were two of Turner's exhibited oils that were shown in 1843, but again were shown in Lawrence Gowing's show in 1966 at MoMA. So picture these two Turners on the walls of MoMA. And they're called, and I'm going to look at my notes because they're long titles. The work at the left is called Shade and Darkness, the Evening of the Deluge, and the other one is called light and color, and they're painted as a pair, in parens, Goethe's theory, and it's called The Morning After the Deluge. And in both of the works, and particularly the one on the right, you see Turner's signature vortex, that vortex of light, of water, of air, of energy that really comes to define his painting. And Christopher, you've written about a sense of movement in your father's paintings as well, and I think it's something that when I thought about your father's work, that wouldn't have been the first word to come to mind when I would think of describing a Rothko.
Yeah, people tend to focus on the more meditative quality of the paintings, but particularly the 50s paintings, and then it actually reappears at the very end of his career. There's very active brush work, and there are very turbulent areas in the way he applies the paint, particularly around the edges of the rectangles. There are often places where multiple different colors are not just peeking out, but really in sort of sharp contrast with one another. And there's a tremendous amount of energy, both in terms of the way the colors interact, but also in terms of the way the brushwork comes out. He also created movement through color itself. And I'm just reminded of a story where a collector had come to him in the 60s and my father brought out a very dark painting for them. And she said, no, I want one of the nice light-colored ones from the 50s. And he said, well, don't you see the violence in that painting? And she goes, no. He goes, well, it's red and yellow. Isn't that the color of the Inferno? So he was always very insistent that even those sunniest looking and sometimes very on the surface plastic-looking paintings, there's a lot of energy under there, and it's not. And it's often a violent sort of primordial energy. He's trying to capture that feeling, much as you will see in these Turner skies, of really powerful elemental forces.
Well, one of the a sentence in Gowing's essay accompanying that exhibition struck me because he was directly linking Turner with what contemporary artists were doing, and I'd like to share it with you because it made me also think of an aspect of your father's work where it might also connect him to Turner too. He said, Robert Motherwell has spoken perceptively of the tragic quality in Turner's art, which painting seeks again now. So in Turner, the quality is perhaps as truly called heroic. And that idea of tragic and thinking about and the drama and thinking about what you've said and what your father has said about his own art struck me.
So when my father's working on his book of philosophical writings, he's reading a lot of Greek drama, and as I say, he's reading Nietzsche as well, and he's very, very focused on how the Greeks are able to capture those most elemental moments in human life, those essential sort of existential questions that most of Greek drama, or at least the tragedies, I should say, focus on that. And he felt that those elements in the sort of tragic elements are the most essential ones that really define our lives, the rites of passage, and the even as we are focusing on birth, we are focusing on death. There are always sort of those ultimate ends there. So those are the qualities he always wants to capture at his paintings. Even as he's talking about joy, there is always the memory of ultimate undoing. So I think those are some of the elements that Turner evokes in a painting like this, and that he always has underneath the surface of his paintings as well. Some of them quite literally in those surrealist works, and then still percolating in the abstract works.
One more Turner Rothko comparison, and unusually the work on the left, the Turner with the black, and the black is there for a symbolic reason in that in this canvas from 1842, Turner is painting the burial at sea of his, I'd say, frenemy, the artist David Wilkie. And Turner was critiqued for the black being not naturalistic. And he's reported to have commented something like, if I could have had any black to make it any blacker, I would have done so. And juxtaposed with a darker work by your fathers as well, I thought made an interesting conversation.
Any of you who saw the exhibition at Pace Gallery last year, the Dark Palette exhibition, this painting was there, and I actually have to say it has never looked better than it did in that place. It is really a couple shades darker than what you see here. It's impossible to photograph. It's also impossible to light in a gallery. But it is three different blacks, and they're different not so much in their hue, but in their reflectivity on a brown about 3 shades darker than that. It is just it's like a 85% cocoa solids, dark chocolate. And yet, if you look at it and you spend time with it, it doesn't really feel like a dark painting. The light inside it, both through the reflectivity of the black and the subtle color in that background, end up seeping through. So as he is exploring the darkness, he also always has that element of light. And certainly in the Turner painting, that black is dominating, and it's quite overpowering, and indeed it's not naturalistic. It's a big blot and shadow in the middle of the painting, but it's in the context of a great deal of light around it.
Absolutely. So that element of hope is present as well amidst the darkness.